Hi, my name's Justin Tokarski. I am a UX researcher and recent graduate of Michigan State University with a master's in media and information focusing on human-computer interaction and a master's certificate in serious games. So what I'm going to be showing you here is a game called Inspired Green. This was developed under a National Science Foundation grant project at Lansing Community College's Digital Innovations Institute lab. The project was to develop an educational pathway for high school students to eventually go through Lansing Community College and get a degree in a building science related field like green energy tech, HVAC, or construction management. Inspired Green is one of several pieces of software that were developed to be used within classrooms in that educational pathway. Inspired Green is a residential energy auditing simulator, and so what we've done is we've set up 4 different houses where students can go through and perform the tasks associated with a residential energy audit. So what I'm going to show you first is some of the admin tools we have. What we did is we introduced some randomized elements into each of the scenes, such as the presence of mold in the attic, or perhaps some of the gutters on the outside of the house being broken, just so students have a different experience each time they play. But what we do here is we allow instructors to actually set which of those events are going to happen, and so they can use this as an evaluative tool as well, so they can determine what the students are going to encounter when they're playing through and make sure that students understand how to approach each of those properly. So I'm going to actually go ahead and just leave all these at the basic settings, and I'm going to show you the ranch home, which is the first one that we developed. The controls are fairly simple, very similar to most computer games where you have your keyboard and mouse interface. You can use either the arrow keys or WASD or WASD to move around, and the camera is controlled by the mouse. So one of the difficulties whenever you're creating an educational game is making sure that the educational content is being communicated, but you keep the controls simple enough and intuitive enough that students play through it without getting too frustrated. In the case of a residential energy audit, many specialized tools are required that all have different functions and interfaces, and trying to incorporate all those nuances would have been impossible in this kind of a game. So what we did was we created, in the upper right you can see the checklist there, and for each of those specific tasks there's certain areas of the game world that students can interact with each of those specific tools, but using the same left click mouse interface. So for example, the gas sensor I'm going to be using in a second here to go out and click on the gas meter to check for leaks. So that will be the exact same interface, for example, as using the tape measure or the CO sensor in different parts of the game. So we still get to communicate the more complex content and ideas behind what the student is doing while still keeping the same mouse and keyboard interface. When developing this, one of the important perspectives we were going from was situated learning, and so maintaining the ecological context in which a student might actually be performing these kinds of activities was very important. As a result, there are some smaller details, such as this conversation with the customer, which do not have as strong of an analog to a real-world activity as clicking with the gas sensor would, for example, but it's still very important to incorporate because it helps create the sense that the student is actually participating in this kind of thing rather than just performing some rote kind of clicking of things and then moving from one room to the other. My primary role in this project was as a UX researcher. My specific responsibilities included doing background research to establish the theoretical basis for the game, performing heuristic evaluations and usability testing, and designing and performing an experiment to test the effectiveness of the game when compared to a more traditional content review sheet. I decided to use Don Norman's 7 design principles from his book, The Psychology of Everyday Things, because this evaluation was done partway through development of the game, and it seemed that those design principles would make it easier to help determine what changes would need to be made before the game was finished. I used a very simple heuristic evaluation measurement of no significant issues, some issues present, and then major issues that were affecting the basic function of the game to help the programmers prioritize which problems they were going to tackle first. Because this was both a usability test and a heuristic evaluation, some of the findings were more on the interface side, such as the fact that the control menu did not accurately explain to the user what the controls were. The graphics were a little unclear. Some of the critiques were a little more on the theoretical side, such as the fact that the baffles were only interactable on one side of the attic, or the fact that for some of the tools like the CO meter and the manometer for the blower door test, you have to wait for them, but there is no context giving for the wait time, and so as a student, the player doesn't understand what the real world analog is for their waiting at those tasks. As I mentioned, I also developed and performed an experiment to test the effectiveness of the game when compared to a traditional content review sheet. For that, I used 3 different measures. One of them was cognitive schema. I checked to see whether there was more activation of the cognitive schema as it related to performing a residential energy audit when students played the game as opposed to reading through a traditional content review sheet. I also looked at ego depletion to see whether the game or the content review sheet required more cognitive resources and led to a decrease in self-control after using them. And I also used self-determination theory to see whether students who used the game or used the content review sheet reported any significant changes in their ideation of future success as a residential energy auditor. I used students who were part of the LCC AEET 120 class, which is one of the classes which this game will be used in. I also developed a version of the experiment for use with students who are not part of the building science program, simply because there were more students that were available. What I have here is a basic write-up of the experiment, what resources would be necessary for it, what the theoretical basis is, and what the expected results would be. And I put together a fairly detailed experimental protocol so that if the lab needs to run more participants, then I can run myself, or if they want to run some participants while I'm working on some other part of the project, they can have someone else very easily run participants through the experiment by going through the script here and just making sure they write down all the relevant data. Well, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any other questions about the work I did on this project, you can email me at the email address below. Thanks for watching.